Good afternoon, everybody. I think welcome for those who have made the time to join us. I think firstly, we need to welcome Comrade Senior Commissioner Landu from the CCMA, who has made time to share with us his knowledge of the challenges that we are faced with in terms of the lockdown. And I think everybody's aware that we received a couple of sad news from most employees when they confronted us of Section 189 letters. And I think that is a challenge that we are faced with. And you will find the time where you have unions that don't have the capacity to deal with those challenges. And I think today is an ideal opportunity to use the skills and the knowledge of the CCMA to guide us and to assist us in dealing with the challenges that we are faced with. And I think everyone's aware this will now become the new normal. And I need to thank also our education department for making this happening, because I think this is what's going to happen now going forward, that we'll have regular interactions with the CCMA to basically equip our organizers and COSATU people to ensure that we know how to deal with the challenges that we are confronted with. And I think also need to thank Comrade Gabby for his assistance as well, to make sure that we are linked on Facebook, to make sure that we use his facilities to have the Zoom session. So from our side, from the office side, we welcome everybody, and I think let's make this enjoyable, but also to ensure that this exercise will indeed equip us to deal with the challenges that we've been faced with at the workplace level. Thank you very much. Thanks, Comrade Paul.
Welcome then to the session today regarding the retrenchments that's facing all of our departments. Even government departments is going to be facing certain layoffs. And those who is logged in here, thank you so much. For those ones on Facebook that I can't see, thank you so much for attending us and listening to us. Just one or two big rules. I'm going to ask that, except for Gabby that's going to look at us and maybe the secretary, can we all just mute our cameras as well? Just put your cameras off and mute we are quite a vast amount of people, and so we don't want to impact the line feed, the internet, so that when the commissioner talks, we don't get a feedback or a buffer that we can clearly understand him. Just go to the chat. When you go to the chat, put up your hand if you have a question. Comrade Gabby will look at it and he will facilitate people he will stop us if there's certain questions. Just for the time, Commissioner, I'm just asking how much time do you have for us today? I'm having it at about 2.5 hours. Would that be fine? Commissioner? You are muted. Commissioner, you are muted. You are muted. Thank you.
Okay. No, look, I'm flexible. We can go for 2 hours. If max, we can go to 2.5. Fine.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm just foreseeing your input is going to raise some questions, and many of our organizers that's going to be logging in is currently busy with negotiations on Section 189s, who might want to pose questions to you. So I just want us to not. I know not all of them will be able to be addressed, and I understand so, but just so that we can address bulk of it. Okay. That, and without wasting any further time, Commissioner, thank you for your time. Thank you for the CCMA for allowing us. The floor is yours, and we are all ears. And you might not see all of us, but we are listening in. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you. You may proceed. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Thank you very much, Pastor. And to the Provincial Secretary of COSATU and everybody who's watching. And on behalf of the CCMA, we want to say thank you for inviting us to do a presentation on this critical topic of our times. You see, when we received this request, when we received this request, I welcomed it precisely because I thought it will assist the labor in terms of how do we further engage with our Section 189 capital A processes. Now, Comrade Paul, I'm assuming that everybody understand what the retrenchment is. And therefore, there is no expectation of me to take your audience through what retrenchment is, but basically to have a helicopter view on the retrenchment processes and how the labor can better prepare itself in engaging on the facilitation process of particularly the large-scale retrenchment as envisaged by Section 189, capital A. So I'm moving from that premise. If I'm wrong in my assumption that everybody understands what retrenchment is, I'm willing to engage such questions if they may come in. But look,
sorry, Commissioner, these are mostly senior organizers,
yes,
senior shop stewards and leadership, so they are well conversed. However, as I said, there might be questions posed later on, and which you might answer, you know, periodically when people do post. But most of them do have an understanding and a general grasp of the Section 189. Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Paul. Look, the first premise I want to move from is that you will all recall that before COVID-19 visited us, our South African economy was already suffering. And at that time, Stats SA indicated that the unemployment rate was hovering at 29%. Now, when COVID-19 visited us, now in July, we got another report from Stat SA, which indicated that the unemployment rate has increased by a further 1%. That takes us to 30+% in terms of our unemployment rate. Now, just oppose that with the retrenchment facilitations that the CCMA has been involved in. And I can tell you, comrades, that it is a bloodbath. Myself alone, I am currently handling about 11 facilitation processes, which require me to have at least every day a facilitation process in terms of 189A. Now, the numbers of the affected employees varies from employer to employer. But the biggest one that I'm dealing with currently, which I have just concluded, I think on Monday, involved a retrenchment of about 3,300 employees. So that tells you that we are really in an economic crisis. And if you look at the reasons that are being advanced by the employer for triggering this 189A, they are mainly influenced by the impact of COVID-19. And they are therefore economical. You will recall, comrades, that in order for the employer to trigger 189 capital A, the reasons must either be economical, structural, technological, or what is called similar needs. But as I've indicated, that if you look at the current processes that most commissioners are involved on, there's a common denominator of economy that the employers are raising, that they are suffering economically, hence they need to restructure. But we have observed when in these processes, the most, for instance, affected industries or sectors will be your tourism, your construction, your hotel and restaurants, and textile. This is what we observed as the most sectors that have been impacted by this COVID-19. And we expect that if there are no easing of restrictions in terms of the tobacco and alcohol, further bloodbath is going to follow in those sectors. But we are hoping that the parties might be able to find a way to ease the restrictions. But what we have observed, particularly myself, is that when the employers issued these 1893 notices, which by law they must issue to the unions, which indicates all issues that must be engaged on in the 189 processes, we are finding that sadly, some of our unions come to the process not really ready for the challenge that is confronting us. And that becomes a concern for some of us. Because remember, if an employer wants to retrench 50 employees, and we all of the understanding that one salary in South Africa on average is at least responsible for 5 dependents. So you are not necessarily having 50 employees that might negatively be affected in terms of them losing their salaries and income. But multiply that by 5. So you are talking roughly 250. Hence, our call is that we need really, from the labor perspective, to up our games in terms of engaging on these processes. Otherwise, the employers are going to have a roller coaster ride in terms of retrenching the employees. Otherwise, this process is merely used to rubber stamp what the employers have already agreed upon. So you will see the notice that you will receive will talk about firstly the rationale. My presentation is that let us as labor engage on the rationale. Let us not engage from the point of view of saying we do not accept the rationale presented by the employer. Let us engage to see whether indeed the employer is bona fide, is genuine in what it is presenting as the rationale to trigger this process. And let us not only engage on the rationale, but let us focus particularly on the measures that the employer has taken to avoid the dismissal, either to avoid dismissal wholly or partly. And this is where I'm sure some of you who have appeared before me will tell you that I really want to spend much time on the measures that the employer has put forward as a means of avoiding dismissal for operational requirement. Because there is nothing disappointing as to find that labor is stuck. They don't offer any alternative in terms of what they think could be done to avoid the bloodbath, as it were. So my invitation to the labor is that when the employer says, for instance, we have considered short time, it's not going to work. We have considered 3 shifts instead of 2 shifts, it's not going to work. We have considered vacancy freeze, we have done that. Do not accept that as the Bible truth. Probe that further. Do your research in terms of what do you think could be done? What do you think could be done? Or invite your employer to explain further What does it mean when it says they have considered a short time and the short time is not going to work? Engage the employer thoroughly in that regard. So that, because if you are able to raise your proposal in terms of what you think should be considered as a means of avoiding retrenchment, that goes a long way in terms of mitigating the impact that the retrenchment might have. For instance, I'm not going to name the union. I had a facilitation last week, which we concluded today. The employer wanted to retrench 40 of its employees, and it's in the food industry. But the union came up with a very brilliant counter proposal to say that we want to go and engage our members instead of working 4 days, but to work 3 days. And we think that if our members may consider that that is a viable option that may save their jobs, and it will save also the suffering that the employer is having in terms of the economy. And the employer welcomed the idea. And I can tell you today, all workers accepted the proposal, and we agreed today that no retrenchment will follow. Workers will work 3 days instead of 4 days. So those are the pragmatic proposals that we want the labor to consider. Because in as much as working less hours or less days have a negative impact in terms of the salary that you or the employee was getting. But as we normally say, half a loaf is better than no bread. So I was impressed with the union's proposal, and I was also impressed by the employers welcoming.
Sorry, please, Commissioner, if you can just switch your camera back on. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I was impressed also by the employer's response in terms of agreeing to that. So I'm just inviting labor that if we can have more of those, we will really be doing much or improved service to our constituents that we are representing. Because we must always bear in mind that those employees, their lives, their future employment depends on us as organizers of various unions in terms of saving jobs. Us as commissioners or as facilitators, we could do as so much, but we depend on the parties to assist in terms of how best we could do this. I'm raising this particularly given the background that we all understand that a retrenchment or dismissal for operational requirement is a no-fault dismissal. And as was said in that judgment of Municipal Employees Society versus Tongat Town Board, where the court held that the employee can do the work, but there is none for his to do. So the employer can dismiss for operational requirement in such instances. And this ties up with the facilitation process I was having in the aviation sector, where the employer says there's no work to be done because all flights internationally have been grounded. Even locally, they are working on a limited capacity, Commissioner. There's no work for these employees. We are not saying that we don't have money, but we are saying that there's no work to be done. And the employer can dismiss or for such instances. The next point that I want us to engage on is in terms of the selection criteria to be used. We know that the popular selection criteria, which in most cases is fair and objective, is that of LIFO. But I want to appeal that LIFO should not be all. Let us think outside the box in terms of what other criteria can be used in terms of assisting our employees. Because at some stage, LIFO might not really be working, in particular where the employer wants to raise the issue of the skills, that we want to sustain employment of those who've got necessary skills for our operations going forward. So I want to also to appeal that when we engage, let us really consider what is it that we can offer as trade union in terms of the selection criteria that should be used as a means of selecting in the event that retrenchment is inevitable, but there is no other way that could be done but to retrench it. We are also finding a situation where labor will ask for disclosure of financial records, which is fine that they could do that. But what is embarrassing is when there is no relevance for the request to have financial records with what the employer is putting on the table. For instance, in one retrenchment that I was involved in, the employer says, we want to retrench commissioner because we have just made our homework and find that if we use technology, we would not really need so many employees. What these employees are doing can be done by the machine. Guess what? The union says we want to see your financial statement. And you ask yourself, but how is the financial statement going to assist you when the employer is not saying we do not have money, but they are saying we want now to move from doing the work manually, but to use technology to do our work. Because you must remember, colleagues, that the court have said, even if the employer is not financially bleeding, but it wants to retrench in order to improve its profits, the courts have said, we might not like it for political reasons, but legally, there is nothing wrong in the employer saying that we want to retrench in order to improve our profits. So we must bear in mind that when we request the employer to kind of give those financial statements that we require must not be asked as a means of delaying the process, but must be asked on the basis that they are going to assist us as labor in formulating our response to the challenges that we are faced when the employer says they want to retrench our members. So we must be clear in terms of why we seek the financial statement. Let's not burden the commissioners to make rulings in terms of the disclosure of information when we know that this particular information is not going to assist us in any event. So that's one of my appeals that I want to make to labor insofar as disclosure of information is concerned. Now, as I'm saying, I'm just taking a helicopter view of my presentation because I want to allow you to engage me on any issue that you think you want to engage me on your experiences in your facilitation process. How do you think you can best also as the CCMA improve our service in terms of dealing with this retrenchment? And I'm happy that it has been confirmed by Comrade Bester that you are all seasoned shop stewards and organizers. So I don't really have to bore you with the meaning of what is the retrenchment. The other observation that I've made, I've also noticed is that, look, the Act says when the employer wants to retrench large-scale employees, they need to invoke 189A. And when they invoke 189A, from the date that the notice was served to the labor or to the affected employees, then the 60-day period kicks in. Because I found that some of our comrades do not really understand when does the 60-day kicks. The 60-day does not kick or starts when we start our first process. It starts from the date that you receive the notice in terms of 189.3. I'm raising this particularly because it is important that, in as much as I understand you, that as organizers, we have many commitments that the union has given us to deal with. But my invitation for you is that when you receive the 189.3 notice, please prioritize in order to use the time effectively. Because if you say you are available in 3 weeks' time, remember, the clock has already started ticking. You are exhausting this 60-day period that you have for this facilitation process. So the sooner you avail yourself for facilitation process, the better. Because you now, immediately, you receive the notice, the 60-day period start to count. The second part that I want to raise, remember in terms of the Act, is that we are required to only have 4 meetings. However, we can have more than 4 meetings, depending on the progress that we are making on each meetings, depending on the parties' agreement that let's extend the meetings, let's extend the facilitation. But do not leave that to the hands of the employer, because you now have to get the consent of the employer to move beyond the 60-day period. You now at the hands of the employer to have more than 4 meetings. So my suggestion and appeal is that, given the task that you are having, but because the retrenchment means that the employees that may be dismissed will be many, and because the retrenchment means that you are now potentially faced with employees, many of them that will not have work for the next year or so, given the economy of our country. So it's important that at the first time that you receive your notice, prioritize your meetings and see how you can accommodate the first facilitation process in order to assist to accommodate this 60-day period. Because unfortunately, comrades, when the 60 days lapses, you all are aware that there's nothing I as the commissioner can do to ask us to have meetings beyond the 60-day unless the parties agree, as I've indicated. So it's important that we take that into consideration. The second one that I wanted also to raise with regard to these meetings is that I always encourage my parties. Some of you will tell you, I saw Sheila is also part of this meeting. She will tell you that I'm always encouraging that the parties must not meet only when I'm present. They must engage even outside my process, because that assists the progress of the meeting. Sometimes other issues do not really want the engagement or the involvement of the commissioner. You can deal with those issues even in the absence of the commissioner and just come to the next process on issues that you could not really resolve in your own meetings. But bear in mind that in those meetings, such discussion may not be binding to the parties up until that they are being recorded, put on record in our formal processes. But I'm always encouraging that the parties to do that. Because remember, once 60-day lapses, the recourse now of the parties is that the employer may issue notice of termination of employment in terms of the Basic Condition of Employment Act. And once it issues the notice, then the union has got 2 options. They can either go on strike in terms of Section 64.4, or they can take the matter to labor court to challenge only the substantive fairness of the dismissal. And you will recall that the court have said, if there was a facilitation process in terms of 189A3, you cannot go to the court and cry about the fairness of the process. You can only approach the court and cry about the substantive fairness of the process. So it is important that we understand those differences. So post the 60-day period, the parties have got that election, I mean the unions have got that election of either going on strike or of going to labor court to challenge the substantive fairness of the dismissal. So I think those are the few things that I wanted to raise for now. I will allow you, comrades, to raise any issue that you want to raise with me. It's either a comment or you can say, raise a question, and then I'm available to respond as we go.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Comrades, the Commissioner has given us opportunity now for his first part to raise any questions or concerns that you would want to raise. You have now the opportunity to do so for the next few minutes until we proceed.
Comrade Paul?
Comrade Sheila?
Yeah, if I may.
Yes, yes. Proceed,
Yeah,
proceed.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. And
Afternoon, Sheila.
Yeah, I just need to raise, it's a question and also a concern, in particularly dealing with the current challenges that we are confronted with. And here,
Thank you.
some of the employers is really trying to come with a sort of subtle approach, but also very connivingly, saying that, look, they now need to make like adjustments to the current conditions, and that is like an alternative to retrenchment. Now, surely that, in my view, as I said, you know, it's a bit of a tricky situation. And we are currently involved in many workplaces that is using that kind of an approach. Now, I heard you talking about the disclosure of information, which is very importantly. And many times that becomes the stucking point when you want to dig into information, and then there's that resistance to disclose. Now, I'm raising it because currently I'm busy with a company. I'm not going to mention the name. Yes. But we are on the verge of deadlocking. So we may end up at the CCMA if we are unable to find each other in our next consultation meeting, which is taking place on the 12th. Now, I just want to raise that because, you know, you make some concessions and there's not say, unwillingness to look at what are we currently dealing with. Versus the challenges that both parties are facing. But there needs to be a fair balance, in my opinion, where that is concerned. So I'm just touching on the issue of that disclosure of information that becomes, in my opinion, very relevant to the exercise, because you can't want to claim this is what you have put in place, but you don't want to disclose what other issues when you are basically being questioned, other than looking in terms of, you know, very current conditions, what variation took place on management side. And then you want to talk about a wage cut, but indirectly workers has also been on a wage cut because they're working less hours. So I just wanted to raise that because, like I said, there is like a timer ticking in terms of whether we're going to resolve it or not.
Thanks, Sheila, for that. Let me take another question before I respond. I see Sean has asked a question, a text message asking if there are any amendments on the cards to change section 189. Maybe let me respond to both for now.
Also, Commissioner, there's a hand up from Kolisile.
Okay, let's allow Kolisile to raise the question.
Hi, thank you, Comrade Paul. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes.
All right, Commissioner, I think, and there is two things, and I'm obviously just gonna lash on the issues that you spoke about so far. One, which is disclosure of information. And, in most cases, disclosure of information is informed by the content of the notice,
Yes.
And let's say that the notice would say that the reasons for this retrenchment is economical and structural. But then as you proceed, engaging the counterpart on the actual negotiations or consultation meetings, then you begin to find that, the reasons that they are putting forward are actually more, structural, not necessarily economical. But then obviously, because you are taking cue from the notice, you then go ahead and put forward a request for some financial information, which then obviously becomes a sticky point, in that you will begin then to find such resistance and the likes. And, so I'm saying, Commissioner, as even you are alluding to say it becomes at some point, embarrassing to actually understand the relevance of such. But then the issue is the ambiguity, that the notice becomes ambiguous in its nature. Then that is how, in most cases, you try to make sure that you protect from both angles. That if they're going to come and place an argument on economical, that you are at least protected in terms of how you wish to proceed. Or even if the issue is more on structural, that you are already have made such preparations in that regard. So that is one. Then, Commissioner, two, we always have a difficulty in this whole issue of selection criteria.
Yes.
In that, they would say skill retention, they would then say LIFO. And then, in that, you then begin to pick up that it actually opens up an avenue for exploitation, in the sense that it's probably that there are people who are favorites to company or to management. But because those people have got lesser service, but probably those people have, maybe have got some academic qualifications whatsoever, but you find them operating in the same space, as everybody else. The nature of our industry, you would normally have your operators, and maybe you then begin to have maybe your technical people in that. But then the more you continue with the discussion, in trying to protect, obviously, those people with longer service, then this whole issue of people with skill retention and technical skills then comes into play. But understanding that those people can also perform these functions, but because they do not possess a qualification that says, I am qualified in this. Those are the challenges, Commissioner, and I think maybe your kind of your opinion on that, in terms of how best to safeguard such situation, and I think I've taken the point that you have raised in terms of what do we believe is a fair and objective criteria, but just to safely manage both issues, because at some point there's an overlap of one to the other. That is how I always view that whole situation around the selection criteria. So for now, Commissioner, I think that is just the two issues that I want to bring. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I will tie up your last question, Tolisan, of this information to that one of Sheila. Look, colleagues, what we must always bear in mind on the issue of disclosure of information is that, and the court have said so a number of times, that the employer is obliged to disclose the information. However, that disclosure of information, the test that we are using is that it must be relevant. So the information that you want the employer to disclose must be relevant to what is before us today. Because if it is not relevant, it logically means that it is not going to assist us in this process. So relevance becomes the key point. So it is important that every time when you want any particular information that you want the employer to disclose, you must do your homework in terms of making sure that the information that you are asking is relevant, will assist in the process. Because if the employer is saying we are retrenching for structural purposes, remember what I said earlier on, that the employer, the court have said, there is nothing wrong in the employer to retrench on the basis of improving on its profit. So the employer may come to the process and says, we have thought about this, and we think that if we can restructure our business this way, we might be able to improve on our profits. Then if you ask me, Commissioner Landu, we want the employer to disclose information, I'm going to unfortunately ask you, but how is this going to help us? The employer can give you the information that shows that, yes, they are making a profit now. And if they do so, so what? How far can we take this debate forward? Because that relevancy comes to mind if the employer says, we are losing profits, we can't make any profit because of the overhead that we're having, the wage bill is excessive, then they must show you. And they can only show you that through the disclosure of information insofar as the audited financial statements are concerned. Then that information becomes relevant. Sheila, on your second question regarding that the abuse of this process by the employers to suit their goals, I agree with you that it does happen at times that all the employers now want to use COVID-19 as a means of retrenching employees, even if you could see that but this business has not really been affected by COVID-19. So we should not lose focus of such situation. And hence I was inviting you, comrades, that when you receive 189.3 notice, do not keep it in your file until on the date of the hearing. Engage people who know better this industry are the employees who are working there. Meet those employees, discuss with them. They will tell you that, but my organizer, how does the employer says they are losing money when before COVID, 20 trucks were leaving this business every day. Even now during COVID, 20 trucks are still leaving the business, or more than 20 trucks are now leaving the business every day. How will that add to what they are saying that they are losing their business? Because if they are losing the business, it means sale must be dropping, and you could only practically judge the dropping of sales by the number of trucks that are going out and coming in. So it is important that you do that. Consult with your employees, with your members. Do not wait until the date of the process that you want to engage your employees. That is my appeal in that regard. Sean has asked if there is are any amendments on the lines. COSATU should know better, Sean, not me. Remember, the amendments are made via NetLec. Before even, sometimes we became aware, because CCMA is currently not a party to NetLec. But insofar as I'm aware of, unless the PS can advise otherwise, I am not aware of any amendments that are on the pipeline regarding the Section 189. Obviously, Labour is welcome to, if they think that there is a gap in terms of 189, which must be addressed by amending the legislation, I am sure you are welcome to do so. Insofar as the issue of the selection criteria is concerned, I'm a great fan of LIFO. I'm a great fan of LIFO because LIFO for me is a very objective criteria. You can't lie about the years of service of the employees. You can't lie about the stats, because LIFO will simply tell you who came which year and which month, how many years of service they are having. So I'm a great fan of LIFO. But there are instances where LIFO will not really assist the parties in the process, where, for instance, there's an issue of the skills that may come into play, where there is an issue of the employment equity that will come into play. Because, and sometimes I became worried when I see that the Labour is not really interrogating this issue of the employment equity. Because remember, comrades, there are sectors or industries that before 1994 were exclusively employing a certain race of people. So if we do not really use or consider the issue of the employment equity, we might be missing the issue of equality in the workplace in terms of racial equilibrium. Because you might find that people who've got longer services are people of a certain race. And if in our discussion we do not engage on this issue of employment equity, we might be missing the point. We might find a situation that post the retrenchment, only certain race has been retrenched and a particular race has not been retrenched. So I want to invite you that in as much as we use LIFO, which is a fair and objective process criteria for me, let us also not lose sight of engaging in other criteria like the employment equity. Also on the issue of the skills, engage the employer. It is not enough for the employer to say, this person has got a degree and you've got a matric. That might not be relevant to the work that we are doing. If we are doing this work, we are operating this machine, if I said in your example, we are operating this machine regardless of you having a degree and regardless of me having a standard 10. Why should you now all of a sudden say, I need Colisile to stay because Colisile has got a degree than you, Mr. Landu, you've got a standard 10, when you have been operating the same machine. So the employer, if the employer deviates from LIFO, there must be good reasons why the employer is deviating from LIFO. So that's what I could say insofar as this issue of the selection criteria is concerned. And remember, if the parties do not agree on the selection criteria and the employer goes on and dismisses employees on the basis of the selection criteria that was not agreed upon, you can post the retrenchment, challenge the substantive fairness of that dismissal on the basis of the selection criteria that the employer has used. So selection criteria can be used as the basis to challenge the substantive fairness of the dismissal. That's why it is important that parties must agree on a selection criteria that to be used. But what I'm observing in my processes is the lack of the labor to engage on the issue of the employment equity, which is the challenge that I want to pose to you, comrades, that in as much as LIFO is good, make sure that there is an objective and fair process, but do not lose sight on the issue of employment equity. I think I've answered those 3 questions that were raised. Let me read, there's another question here. Sean, again, it says, given the poor economic climate, is it not better to negotiate a comprehensive retrenchment agreement with an employers long before there is even retrenchment being raised by the employers? Sean, I will agree with you, because what we have also observed in sectors where the collective agreement talks to the retrenchment package to be offered in the event of a Section 189A process, you will find that in most instances, they are offering better packages than those packages that are dealt with during the process of retrenchment. So I will also encourage you, comrades, that when you engage the employer in terms of the amendments to your collective agreement that you already have, or in terms of the substantive agreement that you are having, please try to engage on this issue as Sean is raising. I very welcome that idea, Sean. I'm also in support of it. It also minimizes the disagreement on the parties in terms of the retrenchment package that is to be paid to employees. Because you know that the employer will now come and says, Commissioner, we can't retrench and then offer exorbitant packages. We will offer what the PCA is saying. And at that time, the union is kind of in a disadvantaged position to negotiate for better packages, because 60 days is ticking and the employer is not bound to agree on a more improved package than what the employer and what the PCA is offering. So to take care of your employees' interest, I will really urge and support what Sean is raising in the comment. The next one, I don't know who is it from? I see it's from UI. It says, thanks for the opportunity, Commissioner. How can we stop the companies which are using COVID-19 as a loophole to retrench their employees? The simple answer to that is that, remember I've said, the employer cannot use the 189A as a fait accompli. They must provide bona fide reasons why they are entering in this process. There must be a link of the operation of the business and the impact that COVID-19 has. Otherwise, in the absence of that, how will they really show that indeed they have been negatively impacted by COVID-19? So engage them on that. That's why I said in my when I started to speak here, to say that I'm inviting you to really read thoroughly the 189.3 notice. You know, I read the 189.3 notice that the companies gave us when I'm going to the process as if I'm going to represent labor, because I want also to understand the rationale that is presented by the employer, to see if there are no gaps in what the employer is presenting. Is the employer not using this process as a fait accompli? So it is important, comrades, that we really interrogate the 189.3 notice to understand it better. And if we do that, I am sure we will be able to expose those employees who want to use the 189 process to retrench employees and using COVID-19 when COVID-19 bears no relevance. The next question is from Bobby Kijima. can you declare a dispute on employer refusal to accommodate equity in a retrenchment exercise? Remember, Bobby, when you are in a process of 189A, the employer must disclose information. That information is not limited to finances only. It might be also relevant to other areas. So this issue of equity might be a relevant issue to say that in order for us as labor to sponsor any proposal insofar as the selection criteria to be used, we want you to disclose your employment equity charts, your employment equity record, so that we know the impact this retrenchment is going to have on the employment equity program of the employer. So there's nothing wrong in you raising that issue. And if it means the commissioner must make a ruling, you can invite the commissioner, the facilitator, to make a determination in the form of a ruling as they disclose our information. I hope I got your question correctly, Bobby. If I have not, you are welcome to raise your hand and expand on the question. The last question that I'm seeing on the board, it says, Commissioner, is it possible once both organized labor and employer agree on suspending the engagement on Section 189, but then the employer goes back to issuing Section 189 at a later stage? Thokozani, that depends on the terms of that suspension. If your agreement was that, for instance, explicitly the parties have agreed to suspend the retrenchment process for the next 3 months, then the employer is bound by that. So it depends on how you have formulated that agreement in terms of whether the employer can now engage in 189 process. We will be guided by the agreement. If the agreement is clear, so in that instance, if the employer, you believe that is reneging on the collective agreement that you have reached insofar as the suspension of the retrenchment is concerned, you can raise a dispute in terms of interpretation and application of a collective agreement that the parties have agreed upon. And the CCMA will be in a position to adjudicate and make a determination as to whether indeed the agreement between the parties says what the labor is indicating, or it says what the employer is saying. So I cannot give you a blanket answer in that. We will be informed by the body of the language that is used in the settlement agreement that the parties have entered into, insofar as the future retrenchments are concerned. I think I've answered all the questions that are there. I don't see who's raising a hand. If you want to raise a hand, please, you can raise the hand.
Comrade, Commissioner, there are two. There's one that I think you may have missed. It's from Comrade Linda. What is the likelihood of retrenchment spilling over to government sector amidst the pandemic? And then Bobby came back as well, but perhaps you want to just answer that one quickly. But they are in the text. They are in the chat.
Okay. Look, I didn't say the one. I don't see the one of it, but it's fine. I got the gist of the question. I can say that it is possible that the COVID-19 pandemic will not be limited in terms of the job effect on private sector only. It is also going to ripple effect to government. Remember, one of the things that this COVID-19 has done, it was to speed up our engagement with technology. Let me make an example now for here where I'm working at the CCMA. CCMA has got about, the Cape Town office has got about 30 or so case management officers that are part of their work is to be at the front desk to assist employees who are not unionized when they come to have queries when they come to refer their dispute. But I'm sure you have seen that the director of the CCMA has issued a directive to the effect that CCMA will be from 3rd of August no longer accept walks in to its premises for people who want to refer their cases, who want to have queries. And the CCMA have said those people must use fax, must use email, must use registered mail. So what does it mean now to the CCMA? It means now that the workload of our CMOs will be diminishing. Come 12 months when we do the review, we might now find out that we don't really need 30 CMOs in the Western Cape. We need about 15 because no walks-in are there. Our people are using the apps to refer their dispute. They are using faxes, they are using emails, they are using their smartphones. We must now consider limiting the number of employees that we're having. Also, for instance, in other businesses, in other sectors, how they are using technologies. You will see now that most people are working at home and they are using technology to work without going to offices. So the employers might see, even in the government sector, but the beauty about the government is that the government must also consider the political implication that retrenchment will have, as we have witnessed now in SABC, how the government has intervened in terms of trying to stop the 189A process to proceed, because it felt, if it is true what we are told, that it felt that it's going to be a political embarrassment to the government. So that's the beauty about the government, that it's not like the business does not care about the political embarrassment. To them, it's about profit. Hence, the first casualties will always be in the private sector than in the public sector. But as labor, you must not lose sight that this might also come to the public sector, and you need to get ready for that when it comes. I see there's another question here from Tyrell. Bobby have raised again, says, besides the disclosure of information, I refer to a situation where a union is insisting on some equilibrium in numbers, overriding life, for example. Then, Bobby, to do that, you must do what I've said. Says you must stand up and says you do not want the LIFO to be used only. You want the employment equity to be used also as a means of a selection criteria. And if the employer does not want to, then you declare a dispute on that regard. And then if possible, then you don't conclude the agreement post the 60 days, then you can refer a dispute to labor court to challenge the substantive fairness of the dismissal on the basis of the selection criteria that has been used by the employer, in that it did not consider the employment equity that was relevant in that particular industry. So you can deadlock on it. As I've said earlier on, I always encourage that where there are employment equity dynamics, let us not put that at the back burner. Let's use that also as a selection criteria where it is possible. I hope I've answered your question now, Bobby. Tyrell, you are saying, good day, Commissioner. When an employer states a Section 189 economic growth, then after as a voluntary process gets under the number required and then opens another business section and branches out into the financial sector, can this be challenged as the company cites economic growth but then creates employment again after retrenchment has taken place? Can I invite Tyrell to probably say this question?
Yes, Commissioner, thank you.
Yes.
What I'm asking is, we currently in the process of a Section 189A
Yes.
with a company at the moment.
Yes.
There was a voluntary selection package that was offered, and there was a criteria, and people then clicked had the option to apply for that voluntary package.
Yes.
Subsequently to that, the company actually got below the number that they actually required. The company then, with COVID, they stopped the process fully. They said, with COVID, we have to rethink everything. It went on for 4 months, and then basically they brought back the Section 189. They're currently sitting at the moment and speaking about it at the CCMA today and tomorrow. But subsequently to that, the company went to actually open a different sector of business, which is in the finance.
Yes.
How does that have a overall effect on the whole Section 189 process as a whole? Because they've stated economic, but yet they're branching out into another sector. But how can it be for economic reasons? Can I put it that way?
All right. Look, it might be for economic reasons, because remember, they might be saying, from the business that you are currently operating, we do not really get the returns that we're expecting. And we have done our own analysis and find that if we can venture into another business, there's a potential of us getting our returns in terms of the businesses that we want to invest on. So in principle, there will be nothing wrong in the employer doing that. But what I will suggest to you is that if it's the same business but wants to venture into another operations, when they open this 189A process, that business should be brought into the picture in this process, so that we see how can we accommodate the current employees that are working for this business to be moved to business B, so that they do not lose their jobs, but they are accommodated in business B. But we must also consider whether their skills that they are having will really match what is required of the business B that the employer wants to operate in. So I will suggest that in such situation, insist on bringing this issue of the business, opening business B into the picture, so that the commissioner who's facilitating the process can assist and see how best it could assist you in accommodating such employees in that business. I can tell you, Terrell, one example. Earlier this year, I was involved in a transport industry retrenchment, where the company wanted to retrench about 90 or so of its drivers on the basis that it has lost the contract with, I think it was Avis or whoever, with Distel, yes, with Distel. So they have lost the contract with Distel. But in our first facilitation, labor raised a very critical issue that drew my attention. The labor says, but how can you retrench when you have advertised vacancies? Then the employer wanted to say, no, but the vacancies that are there are not for this business. We are a group, but we are our own. We don't have an influence on company B, whilst you are in the same group. So, but therefore we cannot dictate on what company B is doing. We, company A, we are retrenching. We don't have any jobs that are available. We've got these 90 employees that we want to retrench. I interrogated the business further. And then it transpired that their business B that they are referring to has about 120 vacancies for the drivers. Then I asked them, but how can you then close your eyes on what your sister company is doing, because you could, and you cannot tell me you can't, you could influence company B to absorb these employees, all of them, take them on board. And once you do that, you are saving as company A, because the retrenchment package that you were supposed to offer, you will no longer be required to offer it. These employees will simply move to company B. And what was even worse, Tyrell, there was that the benefits of company B were the same as company A. So there was no loss that those employees were going to suffer as a result of them being moved to company B. We facilitate that engagement, and we save all those employees' jobs, and no employee was retrenched. So it is important that when you became aware that the employer wants to expand its business by venturing into other businesses, put that also on the table so that you could see that how can you accommodate the current employees that are faced with retrenchment to move over to company B. I hope I have answered you, Tyrell, in your question. Paul, are there any other hands?
Commissioner, there is a hand raised. It's Comrade Huawei. We've got two Comrades Huawei P20 lights. It's one of them. It's one of them. So perhaps they can just speak the question that they wish to ask.
Okay. Comrade, you can ask your question.
That's me, Commissioner. That's me, Comrade Victor from COSATU.
Yes.
Commissioner, I've got just two quick questions.
Yes.
The company have contemplated doing Section 189, and
yes.
we indeed ended, and then we requested for the disclosure of information.
Yes.
Only to find that the information that they have, it is on hardboard, and the company is situated in Johannesburg. Hence, it was quite difficult for us to go through the information that they have. Hence, we feel like we were prejudiced in terms of having that relevant information or the reasons behind the retrenchment itself, because the company only said they have got hard copies in which they cannot send anything away from their office, as they've said. Second question, the company have employed...
Before you go to the second question, what is the reason why they cannot send information to you? Is it a sensitive information, privileged information?
Yes, that's it's a confidential information that they cannot send it to anyone. Before they do that, they send us the documents that we have to sign to acknowledge that the information that they are going to give us will not be disclosed to any party. And then we signed that to acknowledge it, and then we send it back to them. Just a day before the date of the consultation, they call us to say the information that we required is on hardboard. They won't be able to send it to any other province. Hence, we need to go to Johannesburg, and you know the time now. And they still had to put Section 189.
And have you raised that with the commissioner to make a determination?
Yes, Commissioner, we have raised it, and the commissioner did not want to listen to us when it comes to that. But the commissioner decided perhaps to proceed because the employer was just saying that, and the commissioner proceeded with Section 189.
Because if the information is relevant, it will assist you to engage with the employer. I suppose that that information needs to be given to you. It must be dealt with. The commissioner cannot just ignore your request for that information. If the parties cannot agree on exchanging that information, at the very least, the commissioner is obliged to make a ruling in that regard. I will urge you, if the process is still proceeding, revisit that issue and ask the commissioner to make a ruling in that regard.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Yes.
Before I actually
the next question.
The next question, Commissioner, is the employer is retrenching on a national basis, around about 450 permanent employees.
Yes.
And the sad part is within the business itself, there are more than 600 labor brokers that are rendering service. But the company contemplates retrenching now the permanent employees within the business. what channel or what can we do as the labor movement to try and engage the employer when it comes to that? Because there are labor brokers who are rendering service on a permanent basis because they're working Monday to Friday, but they are contemplating now retrenching the permanent staff. Thanks, Commissioner.
Before you go, is the work that is being done by the labor broking the same as the work that is done by the current employees?
That's correct, Commissioner. They are truck drivers and general workers within the business.
You see, those who normally appear before my processes will attest to this. This is what I normally want to establish. Do we have fixed-term employees before we talk about retrenchment? If we do, what is our plan about the fixed-term employees? Because we cannot really talk about retrenching employees who are permanent when we are still engaging with the fixed-term employees. There must be a good reason for the employer to keep on having fixed-term employees instead of retrenching these employees that are permanent. So that's I always ask about the fixed term. I always ask about labor broking, and I invite the employer to tell me why will that work that is done by the labor broking not be given to these employees instead of retrenching them. The employer must engage us on that. And if the employer does not give sufficient reason, then you can use that post-retrenchment as the substantive unfairness of the dismissal. Because I can't really understand why would you use labor broking for the task that could be done by the same employees that you want to retrench. So there must be a good reason for the employer why it needs to engage on that labor broking. For instance, those of you who are in the construction industry will recall that sometimes when these companies got a tender to do a bridge in Kailicha, for instance, they will be told that 30% of work must be done by local community in the form of a subcontract, whatever you want to call it. So in such instances, we will be bound by that arrangement that they've got in terms of the tender that they acquired. That they will say to me, Commissioner, yes, we are using labor broking or we are using the subcontract because in terms of the tender agreement that we have was that we can only do 70% of the work, 30% must be given to the local community by means of a subcontract. Then in that situation, your hands are tied. There's nothing that you could do. But I would urge you to really engage on this one. If the employer does not want to budge, if they do not give tangible and substantive reasons why they want to use labor broking when this work could be done by permanent employees, take them on in terms of the substantive unfairness. Is there any other hand up? I think there were two.
No, that's the only one that was still remaining, and I don't see any further text questions. I don't know if there's anybody else that has a question.
Is there any question, comrades, or are we fine?
Comrade Paul, can you take over perhaps, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Gabby. Comrades, I just want to check, everybody online here, are you happy with the questions? Anything else that the Commissioner needs to answer online? Okay, no responses. Commissioner, you may proceed then if there's anything else that you want to go with.
I think there's a question.
There was a hand that just flashed. Andy, there was a comrade.
There's a question from Sidima. He's saying, my last question, Commissioner, does the employer allow replacement of retirement of African employee with white employee? Sidima, can you just expand on that question?
Commissioner, I think if I can, I don't see it, but I sum it up. The question is that it seems the African member or African person has been retrenched, and then a white person has been employed in his position after being retrenched. I think that's the question, Commissioner.
No, it seems like a retirement.
Oh, so the African is retired, but in his place, an African employee is retired, eh? But is replaced by a white employee.
Yes. So I think when it talks of employment equity, like does not affect the employment equity of the company if the African member is replaced by a Mlungu.
Yes. Yes, Paul, you are correct. And unless that appointment of any color, I don't want to restrict it to white, unless the employment of that candidate is informed by employment equity, then there will be nothing wrong legally. Because there is no law that says if an African retires or leaves or resigns, he must be replaced by another African. As long as the employment equity equilibrium is met, then there's nothing wrong in terms of the color of the skin of the person who will replace that particular person. I hope I've answered you, Sudima.
Right, I see no other questions.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, yes, comrade, proceed. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Commissioner. Yes, you answered me very well.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, Sitima. If I can just wrap up, if there's no other question, I want to appeal, Comrade Bester, please assist us in this regard. I want to appeal to the labor that let us go to this process fully prepared. Let us not wait for the meeting, for the first facilitation meeting, before we look at what the 189.3 notice is inviting us to do. Let us please spend time, go through the notice, consult with the relevant employees, even before the meeting. Let us use this, even the first meeting of our facilitation, let us use it meaningfully. Let us engage productively. If we do that, I'm sure we'll save many jobs. That's my parting shot, Comrade Paul, that I wanted to say.
Commissioner, thank you so much. Would that be your presentation? Let me just check. That's the presentation for today?
Yes, that will be it, because I wanted us to take a helicopter view in terms of 189 instead of going through, yes.
100%. Now, I just wanted to check if there's any comrades here that wants to add on or ask a question or have an issue. We still have about, let's say, 15 minutes. So if there's somebody, you know, in the platform that has got an issue concerning his or her own negotiations and has a problem, I was hoping maybe we can just, and then as a general to everybody to understand. If not, then I would want to thank you so much for your time. But let's just take.
Comrade Paul.
There is a hand up. There is a hand up.
Comrade Paul, my issue is just in relation to the time frame, because once you engage with the employer, then they are in a very great hurry to conclude with the process, and then they get frustrated if the union then asks questions of clarity, and then they just want to move this process along. Can the commissioner maybe speak in terms of the time frames, because they want to force this process?
Yes, as I've said,
very quickly, and sometimes you need to consult with your members.
Yes, Steve, as I said earlier on, remember, once the employer triggered 189.3 notice and trigger 189A facilitation process, the law says the dismissal of employees for operational reasons is suspended for 60 days. So the employer is bound to engage in the process for 60 days. Cannot be less unless the parties agreed otherwise. It can be more if the parties agreed otherwise. But 60 days is peremptory, that the law says once you trigger 189.3, you have suspended the dismissal of employees for operational reasons. Remember, you can still dismiss employees for misconduct. You can dismiss them for incapacity. But for operational requirements, the employees are protected against dismissal for the next 60 days. So the employer cannot rush the process. Remember, the dates that we agree on in terms of the facilitation processes are the dates that both parties are free to have meetings on that particular date. So even us as the commissioner, we will not allow the company to rush the process. We must agree on the 60-day period. Remember also that 189.3 notice have got an item about the timing of the retrenchment process. Engage on that also. Do not leave it to what the employer is saying. Engage on that, agree on the timing. That yes, we agree that it's 60 days, but we have just received the notice, or the CCMA has only scheduled this matter after a 1 month, 30 days have already lapsed. Let us change the timing of the retrenchment in order to accommodate the 60 days that has been wasted because of the CCMA's failure to schedule the matter on time. So the employer cannot dictate the time limits unless it is within the 60 days that the law allows us to engage on. I see Sean's hands up.
Yeah, there are two hands. It's again Comrade Wawai P20 Light and then Comrade Kolisile.
All right.
Thank you very much, Chair and the Commissioner. I think Commissioner, the information that you have shared to us is very vital, and it is fundamental throughout the proceedings, because the dilemma that we are facing as trade unions is quite difficult. Even though, Commissioner, I might have dealt with this matter in a progressive way, where a company intended to do Section 189. And while they were doing that, they actually find out that there are some companies, not within the group, outside companies, and they perhaps decided to retrench these employees. While we're busy doing the Section 189, there's a time when they came and said they've got another job somewhere, not as an alternative, as to say, but they actually made it clear that they have actually spoken to another company so that the company can take them over, not as a going concern, not as Section 197, but they are going to terminate the employment for them in this particular employment, and then they are going to another company. And then when employees did not take that alternative, and then the company said to them, you will definitely cease your severance pay. We are not going to give you severance pay, even though it's a different company from the company that they were working for. It is not Section 197. And that is the situation that we are facing. The worst part of it now, this matter cannot be referred to a bargaining council because it's more than 50 employees. It have to go to labor court. And the process at labor court, it is frustrating that it can take up to 2 or 3 years for this issue to be resolved. What is your take when it comes to that, Honorable Commissioner?
Look, if you want to challenge the retrenchment package that was not given to your employees, to your members, it does not have to go to labor court. That matter can be done by the council if it belongs to a council in terms of severance pay, Section 41 of the BCA. So, because you are not challenging the substantive fairness of the dismissal, as I understand you, what you want to challenge is the refusal by the employer to give those employees severance pay. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, Commissioner. Remember, the argument is to say that the offer that was on table, it was a reasonable offer. Now it is another company. My question is, they have to terminate the employment so that they can be re-employed by another company. That's where the differences are.
because look, the question that should be considered now is the alternative that is being offered by the employer a reasonable offer. This is what will come to mind. That's why I'm saying you must consider taking this matter as a Section 41 dispute. Because if the commissioner is of the view that the offer that has been given to those employees is not a fair or alternative, then the employer will be obliged to pay those employees the severance pay. But if it is found that the offer that they are given, it's a fair or it's a reasonable alternative, then the court or the CCMA will say, then they are not entitled to severance pay. Remember, there is that old LAC judgment of FAU and INJ. When I was still with FAU, we had a situation where INJ wanted to, those days, outsource its canteen. Because at that stage, the canteen of INJ was that of the business. But it wanted to outsource its canteen. And when it outsourced its canteen, the company that was to take over the canteen was in a form of a labor broking or whatever. So the employer says, we are offering you alternative employment. You will go now and work for this company, and therefore we are not entitled to pay you severance pay. We did not agree with INJ. We took the matter to Labor Court. Labor Court says, no, FAU, you are wrong. The test that we are using is whether the offer that was given is that of reasonableness. If the offer was reasonable, then the employer is not obliged to offer alternative employment. And we raise this issue that you are raising, particularly the fact that but these employees now are losing their years of service. They are going to this this offer without any years of service. But unfortunately, even the Labor Appeal Court dismissed our application. I think it's one of the things that need to be revisited by Labor going forward to say that it cannot be regarded as a reasonable offer if I am not going, if my years of service are to be broken. I think it's an issue that Labor must take, but as I understand the law currently is that as long as the employer is offering you an alternative that is reasonable, you might lose on the years of service and you might not get your severance pay for this company, which I agree with you. It cannot be a right thing to do. But unfortunately, that's the law in terms of that LAC judgment that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any judgment that have since overturned that LAC judgment of INJ and FAU. Thank you. Any other question?
We still have Comrade Kolisile. Comrade Kolisile can then go ahead.
Just one.
All right.
So Comrade Sean Wolskett, you can go after Kolisile. If you can just wait Kolisile, then Comrade Sean after that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Comrade Paul. Commissioner, you may have partly covered me on the issue of the timing, you know, in
Yes.
respect of the date since the notice was issued. But then, Commissioner, I'm just trying to establish the legal implications here in respect of the CCMA directive, you know, to postpone cases due to COVID now, you know, and where parties have actually have approached the CCMA requesting for facilitation, and since then nothing forth is coming from the CCMA in respect of setting such matters down, you know. So I'm just trying to establish what could have been done, what would be the legal implications, in respect of such situations. And I think it's a relevant issue that is brought about by the COVID challenges, and whereby the CCMA has subsequently postponed and some cases that are on the roll, but a specific matter relating to retrenchment or a Section 189A notice. So that is just a question, Commissioner. It may be vague, but if you want me to further clarify, I will do so.
You want to check the implication of the 60-day period in the instances where, because of COVID-19, the process, the timeline might have been affected?
That's correct, Commissioner.
All right. And I can tell you, Tolisile, that does happen. I have also processes where we are only left with 30 days. 30 days have already lapsed because of the COVID-19, because of the unavailability of the commissioners, because we only have limited commissioners who are dealing with these 189A processes. In such instances, the attitude that I'm taking with the parties is to say that whilst the law states that we have until the 31st of August to deal with this process, but we cannot be naive and lose sight to the fact that it is not anybody's fault that this matter is only heard for the first time today. So let us agree on an extension of the period post the 60 days. And I did not have any situation where the employer is refusing to do that. They have all agreed to extend by another 30 days. For instance, I'm doing the other national one of a company, I think it's Consolidated Steel, which have about 3 unions or so. When the matter came before me, we were already left with so few days before we reach 60 days. The parties have agreed to extend their 60 days. So the parties must engage even on the first meeting to say that. That's why I said, if you look at the notice that you get in terms of the 1893, it talks about the timing. So parties must engage on the timing. When should the notices of retrenchment be issued? And then you deal with that in that fashion. And I can tell you that in most instances, the parties will agree to extend the period beyond 60 days. Any, Sean, are you still having a question?
Yes, Commissioner, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, simple question. I understand the law very clearly, but my reading of the economy is as follows. We're going to find a lot of retrenchments coming up, some big ones, some small ones, and they will be across the economy. So most of them will initiate a retrenchment notice that says CCMA, here's the referral party, we start the process. Is your organization lined up to be able to deal with all these applications? Because the employers may just cite, we have 60 days and we are compliant and the CCMA must be ready, so must be the other party. Just to factor that the law follow its course. Because the union is going to wait for the CCMA to give a date in any event. Yeah.
Thank you, Sean, for that. It's a very good question that you are raising. We are coping, Sean, but it's very difficult. Remember, this process, comrades, it's also emotionally draining on us as commissioners. Those particularly who've got a working class background, those who understand what does it mean to live without food a day or two. Currently, if you can see my diary, I'm having a process every day. So my management responsibilities are being negatively affected because I must now do this facilitation every day. At some stage, I'm even having two facilitation processes because how fast these processes are coming. Just before I switch on to Zoom link today, I had another application that came before me for another 189A process. So it's tough, colleagues, and I've done, if you can see the referrals that we've received in terms of this process for only August. Remember now we're on the 3rd of August. We've already received 36 referrals for 189A processes. And that can tell you already that it's bad. So it's difficult, but we are navigating under the circumstances. We are training more of our commissioners to be accredited to facilitate these processes, because unfortunately not every commissioner can facilitate this process. There is a rigorous process. They must do the training, they must be mentored by myself or by Velem, and then after being mentored, and then we can say that they are now accredited to this process. So we've got so few of us that are doing these processes. So it's strenuous, but we are trying to meet the challenges. Thank you for your concern in that regard. And obviously, because we don't want this to affect the 60 days that the parties have already talked about. So it does affect the legal implications in terms of how we conduct our processes. And I've seen some of you have attacked us on the Facebook to say that the CCMA seems to be prioritizing on retrenchment than other dismissals. We take that criticism, but we must bear in mind that the law says we only have 60 days to facilitate this process. And because it affects the number of employees than an individual employee who has been dismissed, we have to pay attention to this and deal with these processes. That's my take on it.
Is there any other hands or submissions to the commissioner now? Anybody else? Last take before we. Is there any other commissioner or any other comrade that wants to do a submission or have a question? Nothing.
There are two hands up.
Okay, Comrade Gabby, you can.
Yeah, there's Comrade Dion, and then there's Sintembile Victor Langa.
All right, let me start. Let me just say thank you to the commissioner. I hope this will be an ongoing kind of discussion or information that is coming from CCMA. And I will definitely be happy if Nobala and Paul and all the panel that organize this can keep on doing it, because it is so helpful towards the struggle and the worker leaders of this country. Again, it is greatly appreciated. I thank you very much.
Thank you, comrade. No, that's fine. The CCMA and the commission knows they are always available, always willing to help. Of course, the better we are prepared, the less we give them problems at CCMA. So they are very happy to assist us. That's the one thing. The other thing is we will keep on doing these kinds of sessions as the need arises and what comrades want. We will keep on doing that. And yeah, the other comrade, Gabby, who was the other person?
That's Comrade Dion.
Sorry, Comrade Dion. Sorry, thank you. Proceed, Dion.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Thank you for the information, Commissioner. It is helping us a lot. You know, it's at least refreshing us as well. Our minds, seeing that we are confronted with already with retrenchments and in some instances also closures of businesses. Commissioner, I just wanted some clarity where the role of the commissioner is concerned. Specifically, when is it where the commissioner will be able to have a ruling, specifically when the discussion is between the parties, when it comes to a reasonable alternate. You know, when is the commissioner that is doing the facilitation, you know, be able to intervene and give direction where that issue is concerned? That is my question, Commissioner, for this process. Yes.
Thank you, Comrade Dion. Comrade Commissioner, you can respond.
Okay. Thank you, Theon, for such a question. It's a good question. We are normally confronted by this in our processes. And I always jokingly say to the parties in the process, do not elevate me to be a judge. I am just a commissioner facilitating this process. Remember, Section 189A process is a joint seeking consultation process. The role of the facilitator is very minimal. The facilitator cannot make other rulings regarding the process. For often parties come and say, Commissioner, we believe that the Section 189A or 189.3 notice is defective in that we did not get it or blah, 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 blah. Remember, when you raise that issue, you are basically wanting to say the process is unlawful. When you raise that the process is unlawful, you can't raise that with me. You must go to Labour Court and interdict the process. Like what NUMSA has done on this issue of the SAA, when they went to interdict the business practitioners. So if you believe for whatever reason, for instance, that the process is unlawful, you can raise it in my process, but don't raise it with an expectation that I'm going to make a ruling, because you'll need to go to Labour Court to challenge the process. True, on the issue, for instance, that you have raised of the selective criteria or whatever, my role is merely to assist, to mediate the different position of the parties. But I cannot impose, because this process is akin to conciliation. We all know what conciliation is. So this process of 189A is also akin to conciliation. There's little that the commissioner can make a ruling on. One of the issues that the commissioner can make a ruling on is what we have talked about earlier on, the disclosure of information. That the law has given us the powers to make a determination when the employer is refusing to give the information that is relevant to the trade union. But insofar as the selection criteria, insofar as the timing, insofar as the severance pay to be given, I cannot make a directive to the parties. I can merely suggest to the parties, as I normally do. What I normally do in my process is, if I found that what is the sticking point here relates to the severance package to be given to the employees, I normally ask permission of the parties to engage the parties separately in terms of trying to have a middle ground insofar as the package is concerned. And that works in most instances. Parties welcomed my intervention and they agree on the middle ground. But we cannot impose on the parties what they should regard as fair in terms of either the package or in terms of the selection criteria that to be used. I hope I've answered your question, Dion.
Comrade Dion, are you covered?
Yes, I'm covered. Thank you, Comrade Paul, and thank you, Commissioner. I'm clear now, yes.
Thank you, Dion.
Comrade Gabby, can you see, or do you see any other hands raised for the Commissioner?
Comrade Paul, sorry man, I don't know how to use this technology very well. As Comrade Elton speaking, we use normally Microsoft Teams. It's the first time I really use Zoom because our company prohibits us from using Zoom, but I wanted to raise a quick...
So you're more advanced than us, Elton.
Comrade Elton, just hang on, just 1 second. Comrade Gabby, is there anybody else that had a hand raised?
I can't see anyone and there are no chats either, so I'm sure it's okay if Comrade Elton goes ahead now.
No, it's okay. Then fine, Comrade Elton, then you can proceed and put your question to the Commissioner.
Thank you, comrades. Commissioner, sorry, man. I just wanted to put forward the problem I'm sitting with is you start with the Section 189, the company produces Section 189.
Yes.
As soon as the company produces and you start to engage them, then the company comes up and it brings out voluntary packages. And when you challenge the voluntary packages, because now delays the process, you challenge the voluntary package, you're saying, look, it's something that we need to negotiate on. The company say, but they got the right to do it and put it out there, and we challenge it, and we lost it more than one occasion, but it says people got the right to volunteer. Now the people volunteer because they fear of retrenchment. They take the package, they go. If they don't go, like in the one instance we do, we negotiate it, and you come to a point, and as you come to the point where you've got the criteria, everything done, and where you're going, they spring up a Section 187, where they send the people over. And when the people go over, it's better than what the law allows. But when the people are there after that period, I don't know if you can't, I don't want to call it collusion, or to make sure there's an extra contract or something there to cover the salary of the people or everything for that period while they're there. And the minute that period is done, that was negotiated with them around 97, then that those workers who were transferred get told either one, they're going to be retrenched if they don't take a reduction of salary, which means that, you know, everything you try to do protect them is gone. The question is that it happened on more than one occasion, but you can't call it collusion. You can't. How do you deal with these kind of tactics? Because it's become such a norm. Because what they cite is not only economic. They says that due to the sector that we deal in, the changes are so quick, and the fourth industrial revolution made so much changes in the technology in the sector that they're under pressure all the time, that they need to downsize or change with the environment. And they throw these tactics in the last 5 years, and we shrunk down by half in the companies in the sector, and it's very difficult to deal. So I'm looking for guidance, because every tactic we use, you're coming to an end, and we can't spend labor court fees all the time.
All right, thank you, Elton, for that. And I'm happy that you are raising this issue of the voluntary severance package. And at times I say I'm on collision course with some of my comrades when this issue comes in. My take, comrades, on this is that, remember, your responsibility as the labor is to save jobs with the assistance of the facilitator and with the assistance of the employer party. What jobs do we want to save? We want to save a situation where people will be forcibly retrenched. Now, why would we not encourage, or why would we want to disrupt the process of the voluntary severance package? Because my logic tells me that people who want to take VSPs are adult people. They have made their considerations. There are reasons that are better known by them where they want to exit the employer. And when they do so, by implication, they are helping for us to save the jobs of those employees who do not necessarily want to exit the business. I understand that you want to get the better deal for even those who want to exit the business. My suggestion that I'm always giving is that instead of coming to this process and want to prevent the VSP taking place, influence your constituents that they must not consider the VSPs up until such time that you give a green light to them that they must consider it, because you want to negotiate for a better package to them. But unfortunately, VSPs is part of the methods that are used to mitigate the forced retrenchment. So we cannot really stop the employer when it wants to offer VSPs. But of course, I always advise the employer that in as much as legally nothing prevents you to offer VSPs, but for the sake of this process, for the sake of maintaining respect, and for the sake of making sure that this process goes smoothly as possible, do not be trigger happy in offering VSPs until it's a product of this process, so that the union buy into it, you agree on it, how much it should be given. So that's what I can say in the issue of the VSPs. On the issue of the 197 transfer, you are correct that, remember, 197 says if you are transferred, you cannot get, you cannot go and be transferred and receive less conditions of employment than what you used to get. But it does happen invariable that 6 months in your new employment, the employer says, yes, we have taken you on your salary that you were getting from that employer. We understand it was a 197 process, but we cannot afford now the salary that we have taken you on. We want now to cut your salary by 10% or whatever in order to meet our salary challenges. When they raise that, the employer have got the employee have got the right to refuse that. And when the employer refuses that, the employer is now obliged to enter into a 189 process. They cannot just decide to cut that employee's benefits if the employer does not agree. They can do that by agreement or following a 189 process. Unfortunately, that's the only way that they could do, to follow 189 process in order to get the employer to consent to that. In the absence of 189 process, or in the absence of that employer agreeing to lose such benefits, the employer cannot do that. I hope I've answered all the questions that were raised.
Comrade Commissioner, that's exactly what I was saying on the section of 197. The law says up to 2 years. Now, what they do is the company then negotiate even better than the 2 years, but they make sure there's a contract to cover, whether it's 3 to 5 years. Now, at the end of that 3 year or the 5 year period, they do the section 189 and they tell them they're going to reduce his salary or they're going to pay those people off eventually. Also, you understand what I'm saying? So I don't know whether to call it, like I said, I don't want to call collusion or what it is. They make sure they protect them and the company just for the period that the law says, that 2 years. And after that, they're not worried. You're gone. And that's a problem we had. Like I said, with the first part of the VSPs, it becomes a problem with us and the company. We tell the people to wait, then they negotiate. But the companies play a very difficult tactic in a period. They say, we're prepared to just give this, we're not prepared to negotiate. If the people don't take this by so and so a time, then we're going straight after the 60 days into the voluntary, and you're not going to get the same as this. That is why people take it. You understand what I'm saying? And it's not the people making informed decisions, because we always ask the company, if you're going to do voluntary, do it voluntary for a period of time. Allow these people to see good financial things, because all these comrades that we see later suffer financially because they fear of losing, so they take what they think is the best. And we're trying to say there must be something different in this one section 110 to allow us to protect, to negotiate a period as well as a protected period, and how the voluntary package happen, so that these people can make informed decisions and not uninformed decisions where their family suffer. And that is the problem that we're sitting with. That is what I was looking for guidance. How do we get this, or how do we change the law so that we can have an impact on those things and then make the correct decisions? Because only 2% of the people who left, of the 15,000 that left, made it. All the others suffer.
I hear you. Maybe the only way you could do that, as Sean was asking earlier on, are there any amendment on the pipeline, the only thing that you could do probably is when there are amendments on the pipeline to see how we can tighten up this gap in terms of the voluntary severance package. It becomes part of the engagement process that you tighten up, that the employer cannot just offer it without having a consensus on the table on it. But otherwise, currently, nothing legally prevents the employer for offering the VSPs if they want to. Unfortunately, Elton. But I hear your point that you are raising on that.
Commissioner?
Yes.
My apologies, maybe I joined late and maybe you did address the issue of the training layoff scheme in terms of a possible option when it comes to this process.
Yes, but what is the question in that regard?
How do you introduce it in terms of this process, giving that as an option to the employer?
Yes, if remember, if the reasons for restructuring is economical, as CCMA commissioners, we are trained to approach what is called a holistic approach to the process. A holistic approach will entail that we present to the parties these layoff schemes. We present to the parties the involvement of other stakeholders like your proudly South Africa, your IDC, whoever can be affected or can play a meaningful role in terms of assisting the process in avoiding the retrenchment. So if it's economical, the reason, and you see that this thing that the employer is facing with is for a temporal basis, then we will invite the employer to consider that. We will make a presentation to the employer, and then if the employer is happy with that, that will be the consideration, and the layoff scheme will be done, and the retrenchment will be parked for the period of the layoff scheme. So it is one of the considerations that we are doing. It's one of the things that we are suggesting to the parties to consider. But remember, for layoff scheme, it must be there must be a temporal impact that the business is suffering. In other words, you can't say when even after 6 months, the position that the business finds itself in, it will find itself again after 6 months. The layoff scheme might not really assist in that regard. But we've got a specialist in the CCMA who will be assisting the parties in terms of the layoff scheme to see whether it's going to work for the parties or if it's not going to work. Thank you. Can we wrap up now if there's no other thing? Paul?
Yes, Commissioner, I'm here. Comrade Gabby, anything else?
Comrade, I can't see anyone else and there's no chat, so I'm sure you can conclude.
It's not a crime not to ask a question.
Well, one last round. Who was that now? Comrade Commission, you wanted to ask a question?
No, I'm saying it's not a crime not to ask a question.
That yes, no. You are right. I just wanted to check, comrades in the group, everybody, last round finished. Are we finished? And we're finished. I just want to check, Comrade Melvin, are you still here?
Yes, I'm still around.
Thank you. Comrade Melvin, would you want to just do the closing for us, if you don't mind?
Yes, thanks everybody. Yeah, I think first I need to thank the CCMA for allowing us to have Commissioner Landu with us. It was indeed a very insightful, very learning exercise. And I think, as was said by some of the comrades, it was very refreshing the minds of our organizers. And I think one should use the knowledge that you've gained today by implementing it at a workplace level. And I would like to raise the question. There was questions raised, and I think it was well responded to by the commissioner. Some of the questions that were raised is basically things that should be dealt with at network level when it comes to amendments. So I think that's one issue that was raised by the leadership and shop stewards. But I need to thank all the affiliates that have made themselves available for the outside. There's also outside people out of COSATU that have also linked in. I also need to thank those on Facebook that have took the time to form part of this very important exercise. And this will continue. I think myself and Comrade Paul will engage further to ensure that we at least have once a month a similar exercise on various topics. And the Commissioner on the CCMA has already gave us a commitment that they will partner with COSATU to ensure that we empower our organizers in this field, because ultimately, as I've said in the beginning, this is the new normal and we should adapt to doing things differently. I will also encourage organizers and staff and office bearers. The CCMA has 2 sessions on the 13th and the 14th. The 13th also talks about the question of retrenchments, and that will be a whole day session. And on the 14th, there's another session that talks to the new CCMA amended rules. And I think those 2 sessions is very important, comrades. I will appeal that you guys please send communication to Comrade Sabi to register in order for you guys to lock in when we have those 2 sessions. It's important that we empower ourselves, because ultimately we are now in the new phase of doing things, and it's important that we are not left behind, that we follow the queue in terms of being empowered to deal with the issues that we are faced with. Once again, thank you very much from COSATU side, and once again, I need to also thank Comm Landu for putting time aside to be with us. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thanks, Comrade Paul.
No,
Thanks,
on my, okay.
Okay, Commissioner, I just wanted to thank Secretary for the words. Thanks so much. And Comrade, from my side, before you close, I just want to thank you for being here, for assisting us in this program, so that members and shop stewards and organizers can be made aware of what was needed and to be just on point of what's happening. And then Comrade Gabby, thank you so much for your assistance, for the technical side, the TUMSA. It comes natural to you, the technical things, and we thank you for assisting us and allowing us to use your platform and being there for us. Thanks so much, Comrade Gabby. Commissioner, thank you. And then last words to you before we close. Thanks, Commissioner.
No, also on my side, on behalf of the CCMA, I just want to say thank you very much, COSATU, for this initiative. And as you know, that we are always willing to engage you on any issue at any time. Thank you very much. I hope that from this, we have learned 1 or 2 things that will make us good organizers and comrades in terms of dealing with this process. Thank you very much, and to everybody. Bye-bye.
Commissioner, thank you, comrades, for your time and attendance. I hope you've learned something and that you are going to be attending our next session, which we will hope to be in the next 3 weeks. Thanks so much, comrades. Good night. Thank you. Thank you, Comrade Gabby.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.